And Lisa, there's a Q&A function down at the bottom too.
Oh, great. Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. People are starting to come in now. Appreciate you spending your Sunday afternoon with us, this beautiful Sunday afternoon. So glad you could be here with us to learn about this important bond issue that's going to be on our ballot. The early voting, I think we have some form of early voting that starts on October 5th, and then we're going to have the countywide early voting starting after that. And we're all, of course, going to get all our neighbors out to vote. This is an important one, not only for this bond issue. We have some 4 Albuquerque School Board, APS School Board positions that are on the ballot. We need to make sure that we get out the vote and get some really great school board members elected to represent us on the Albuquerque Public Schools School Board. And then, of course, we have our mayoral election and city council. And so glad you all are here and participating and becoming informed voters. So my name is Flor Lucero. I am the chair of the Democratic Party of Bernalillo County, and so honored to serve you in that capacity. I am pleased to introduce you now to Paul Timpain. Paul is our treasurer, and he is very interested in this issue. So when he told me that, I was like, great, have a program, Paul, and here you go. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Paul, and thank you very much, Paul, for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome, Flora. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'd just like to introduce a couple of other people on our panel. Danny Leyva, who's the Bernalillo County Democratic Party Vice Chair. And we have Lisa Padilla, who is the president of the Barelas Neighborhood Association. And Mark Motzko, who is the Capital Implementation Program official with the City of Albuquerque. And as Flora said, the purpose of this forum is to present the project and financial details of the bond issue that will be on the ballot in the upcoming election, and also to hear the perspective of the neighborhood where the stadium could be built and the perspective of the City of Albuquerque. And we're going to start our forum with some information which summarizes the proposal, some background information on the New Mexico United soccer team, and the proposed sites for the stadium to start the discussion.
Ready for the PowerPoint?
Yes, sir.
Can you see it?
Yeah, so I think you're probably at the end of the presentation there.
That makes sense to me. Yep. There we go.
Okay, and so our title, of course, is New Mexico United Stadium Proposal, Voter Information. So on to the next slide. So in our upcoming election on November 2nd, and as Flora indicated, some forms of early voting and absentee voting will start on Tuesday. And the early voting period at various sites around town goes from October 16th through October 30th. But one of the items on the bond issue will be the $50 million bond issue that was approved by the City Council to be on the ballot. And I'm just going to read how you'll see it on your ballot. It's Resolution R-21-187. Shall the City of Albuquerque acquire property for and to design, develop, erect, construct, and otherwise improve a public stadium for multiple uses, including but not limited to professional soccer events, to be financed by up to $50 million of its gross receipts tax revenue bonds. And I know there's been a lot of discussion in the media and in the newspapers and on TV and so on about the different types of bonds. And really, there are 2 types that are generally used for financing projects like this. And one is called a general obligation bond. And a bond of that nature is essentially guaranteed by the entity that issued them to fulfill the promise of payment. The revenue bond is a little different. The bonds are issued with the source of revenue providing the guarantee of repayment. So again, here's another look at the resolution. But in this particular case, as it pertains to the soccer stadium, what's going to be on the ballot is not a general obligation bond, but a revenue bond. So again, the city of Albuquerque would raise $50 million from the gross receipts tax revenue bond. And a bond is essentially long-term debt. It must be repaid. The estimate in this particular case is it would be repaid over 25 years at a rate of approximately $3 million per year. And the bond, the source of the revenue are a portion of the gross receipts tax that would be collected at the stadium. So when New Mexico United plays a soccer match, they sell tickets, they sell concessions, souvenirs, and so on. All of those items have what's called a gross receipts tax on them, which in New Mexico, the gross receipts tax is essentially the sales tax of a business. So when we vote, we need to keep in mind that this is a revenue bond. The payback has to come from the revenue generated at the new stadium. So United Stadium proposal summary, again, it's a $50 million bond issue. However, the total cost of the project and the current estimates range from 65 million to 70 million. So when you look at that project cost estimate of 65 to 70, and we've got a $50 million bond, that leaves a gap of about 15 to 20 million. However, some other sources of revenue are going to be part of the picture here. In addition to the revenue bond of 50 million, the state of New Mexico is going to be contributing 8 million. And it was recently announced on September 23rd that the New Mexico United team is going to make a contribution of 10 million. So if you add those three pieces together, the 50, the 8, and the 10, now you're up to 68 million, which is right kind of in the mid-range of the product cost estimate. And bear in mind on the estimate, we're really talking the cost only of the stadium itself, not that does not include if the city has to purchase or acquire land adjacent to the stadium site, and any cost associated with that is not an element of the 65 to 70 million number. So if the bond issue is passed, the stadium would be owned by the city of Albuquerque. And the New Mexico United would pay annual rent to the city of $800,000 a year. They would also pay an additional $100,000 minimum to the city each year, but they would keep all revenue generated by the stadium outside of specific city organized events. So what that means is, in addition to selling tickets for the events that the United matches have, they also have other sources of income such as advertising, premium seating, merchandise, parking, and so on. And rather than pay a percentage of that to the city each year, the agreement that was in the recently announced lease agreement from last week was they would pay a fee of $100,000 per year. So the United in total is actually going to be paying $900,000 a year, comprised of those two components. Oh, that looks like a.
It
Just go
it
on
looks
to
like the
the-
same, but it just mentions the women's professional.
That's okay.
team.
Just go on to the next one if you could. Yeah.
Got it.
So initial proposal for use of the stadium. So the United will play approximately 18 matches a year. And in the lease agreement, there's a provision that says the city of Albuquerque will be allowed 15 days annually for exclusive use of the facility for appropriate city and/or community events. and that could encompass a range of activities such as concerts or other sporting events. I know there was talk that high school soccer championships could be held there and so on. So 18 matches plus an additional 15 is the current thinking on the usage of the stadium, but certainly I believe the hope is that more events could be booked there on top of the 15 days. And if this bond issue is approved, construction of the stadium would begin in mid-2022. So this page titled "Why a Stadium?" and a dedicated stadium is one of the requirements for a team to be promoted to the first division, which is the MLS or Major League Soccer. The United team, and we'll show that on the next slide, is in the kind of the second tier of professional soccer. I kind of equate it to Major League Baseball, where you have the major league teams, and a team like the Albuquerque Isotopes is a AAA farm team, which is the second level in the professional hierarchy. Now, the United have been among the best supported clubs in the United Soccer League. Prior to COVID, they led the league in average attendance at over 12,600 per game. The Isotopes Park, where they currently play, has a little over 11,000 seats, but they also have additional areas where people can sit. There's a grass area beyond the right field fence. There's club seats. There's suites that people can purchase. So on top of the 11,000, there's another, 1,800 to 2,000 spaces that could be sold as tickets to get the attendance up close to the 13,000 mark. Now, during COVID, the attendance has averaged about 8,400. And in the study on the potential new stadium, the proposed stadium would hold between 10,000 and 15,000 seats. And just a little bit of background about the New Mexico United. They're a member of the United Soccer League, or USL. They're in the Western Conference and the Mountain Division, and each year they play 32 matches, 16 at home, plus 2 preseason games. And as I said, the home matches are currently played at Isotopes Park. And there's been some talk about do teams in the USL need to have soccer-specific stadiums? There's 7 teams in the Mountain Division. On the left side of the page, those 5 cities have soccer-specific stadiums at this point. Albuquerque and El Paso are the 2 that do not, as we both share the stadium with the baseball team.
So I can jump in here now if you'd
Yeah,
like.
go ahead, Danny.
So there was recently the preferred sites have come out. So I compiled here a little map of the area and then a picture just to kind of give everybody the chance to see more or less a kind of, well, I guess not see, but picture where that stadium could be. Cole at Broadway, Cole's a one-way, so looking at this picture, if you kind of look out, and hopefully everyone can see it, you can actually see the bridge for Cole on the left-hand side of there. The total for this site, it's looking like 69.9 million. Of course, with the bulk of that being that 54.4 million in construction costs. This is still Cole and Broadway. Pros, potential on site development opportunities, multiple traffic access points from downtown and the freeway, parking availability, and less than a mile from downtown. The cons, there are railroad tracks there, and that's going to be a little bit more of a problem to the west. And there's quite a few buildings there. There's just a lot of stuff. And that would require perhaps a little bit of relocation. And there are power lines that just run through there. Those pesky power lines. The second site is Second and Iron. And if you take a look, that's kind of, if you look at the map, there's coal again. So they're pretty close to each other. You can kind of, hopefully you can kind of see where that is. And the construction cost here is looking like 64.6 million as opposed to the 69.9 for the other one. Again, with the bulk being those construction costs, which are a little bit lower here at 50.2 million. But you know, as you can tell from that picture, there's stuff here too. So pros for this site, potential for anchor tenant adjacent to site, potential on-site development opportunities, proximity to downtown, and the view of the mountains, which is always nice, right? The cons, limited parking on site, again, that potential displacement of businesses. And on this site, actually, there's single family residences in the surrounding neighborhood and traffic access. Those pesky railroad tracks, they're still there. And then there's north and south access only via 2nd Street. So, you know, outstanding questions for the stadium. We have 2 points here about things that will likely not be finalized when voting takes place, which is which site has been selected and the cost of land acquisition surrounding the stadium site, which Paul mentioned earlier, doesn't factor into those estimates that he was giving. So that is also up in the air. And I just wanted to put this little map out here about who actually gets to vote on it, because this is a City of Albuquerque municipal election. So I know quite a few of us are probably familiar with this map. It's the Albuquerque area, right? Which notably leaves out, of course, the South Valley and Los Ranchos. They will not have resolution R 21-187 on their ballot. And you can see in those dark gray areas, it is obviously the South Valley, Los Ranchos, and there is some smaller little areas, miscellaneous areas in there as well. And all of the details for the executive summary and the project details are available on the City of Albuquerque website, cabq.gov.
Yeah, and Danny, I wasn't necessarily going to go through the isotope stuff. I might pose it in a question to Mark in a second, but this is just a couple of slides with some background information about how the isotope stadium was built and how that came to pass and what their financial terms are. So
perfect. Those are on screen. And of course, these slides will be available to everybody after this in PDF format. So if you want to take a look at these, don't worry, these numbers aren't just going to go away.
okay.
More of the same.
So I think I'm going to move on to some questions. And Mark, I'm going to start with you. So if the bond issue passes, can you kind of itemize what the next steps in the process would be?
Well, I think if the bond issue passes, Paul, thank you for having me, by the way. I think we need to run in multiple parallel lines, including finalizing a location, finalizing a lease agreement, an operating agreement with the United, and probably most importantly, finalizing the community benefits agreement with our just newly hired lawyer, Julian Gross, who is very familiar with these kind of community benefits agreements. You know, we want to make this stadium downtown. And Danny, just teasing you a little bit, you've called the train tracks pesky. We call them an opportunity. We'd love to have an additional rail runner stop there and be able to use that multimodal transportation. Obviously, parking is going to be very difficult downtown, but that's why these stadiums are being built downtown, so we can have multimodal as people get to them. So really, I think it's a three-pronged process of finalizing the location. And not to make a Monty Python joke, but it's actually a four-pronged process because we would need to get a design and construction team on board as well. So location, design construction team, community benefits agreement, and then the operating and lease agreement finalization with United.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, I want to kind of piggyback a little bit on a comment Mark just made. I noticed, I was reading an article on the New Mexico in depth, and you had some comments in there, and one of which was, it said something along the lines of Lisa Padilla and other neighborhood leaders are putting together ideas for what they would like to see in a community-based agreement. Could you go over some of those items that you would like to see in that agreement?
Absolutely. I mean, this is not to say that we are in support of the project as it stands, but the things that we're trying to think about in advance of this kind of thing happening, if it does, is to protect the community. So thinking about preferential treatment for and hiring for residents, tax benefits, and the city doesn't have control over that. So we've talked to some state officials about, possibly working together about tax issues, because we really feel that if the developer and the owner get tax rebates, that the people who are bearing the brunt of the actual placement in their community should have similar benefits. And so, thinking about that some of the things that were included in Nashville's community benefits agreement, they actually were able to acquire affordable housing for people in their community as part of their agreement. And we'd love to see something like that, especially if we're going to have houses removed from our community. Housing in Bareilles is already pretty scarce, but we know that that's true for any of the proposed sites. And it's, South Broadway would lose homes as well, and we'd like to see people continue to live in community. Things like that, but also partnerships with existing businesses, so featuring local food products in the stadium instead of national chains and that kind of thing. Food that's acquired from local farmers, those kinds of ideas.
Great, thank you. A question for Mark, and it kind of came up a little bit in the presentation portion of it. There seems to be a little bit of uncertainty about, is there a requirement by the United Soccer League that all stadiums are soccer specific? So in other words, would the United have to proceed with this project to retain their standing in the United Soccer League?
So Paul, thanks for the question. I'm actually not 100% sure on that question, because my responsibility with the city would be to get the city-owned facility, multi-use facility, designed and constructed. It's my understanding that that was presented earlier on, and if something has changed, I haven't been made aware of that change. But it was my understanding that United could not continue to use Isotope Stadium if they were to continue competing in USL.
What do you think the United would do if the stadium bond is not passed?
Paul, unfortunately, I couldn't, and I wouldn't want to speak for United. I would leave that question to them.
Okay. Lisa, in the same article I was reading in New Mexico in depth, and you kind of alluded to it in the last your last answer, you said you worry that if the stadium is built at Second and Iron, people would be priced out from this place that is so beloved and so important to so many. I mean, is there a way to quantify number of residences or number of businesses that could be displaced if the stadium was to be built at that location?
Well, in looking at the map of Morelos, there are at least 2 houses that would be lost to construction. There's a building that's owned by the Journal. I think there's an awning business, and then there's an auxiliary building for the Brothers of the Good Shepherd, where they have their counseling services available. So on the Morelos side, it's, a few structures, but we have so few here in the first place. That's significant.
Right.
And on the Broadway side, I believe there are at least 5 or 6 homes, and then it would be a thrift shop, and I think it's like so a couple of nonprofits. So it would be a significant amount of things that would have to be purchased. But I think that it's an opportunity to look for affordable housing partnerships, and I don't know what kind of funds would be available for that. It's possible that the state has funds that they could contribute to that, or we could maybe look for national funding sources. But as it exists right now, that would be an additional expense for this. Yeah.
Thank you. Mark, in the presentation, we talked a little bit about the distinction between a revenue bond and a general obligation bond. And, when I printed out my sample ballot the other day, I noticed there's 14 bond issues on the ballot this year, and 13 of them are general obligation, and one is which is this one, the stadium bond, is a revenue bond. Is there an advantage one way or the other from the city's perspective, general obligation versus a revenue bond?
Paul, that's an interesting question. So I'm actually the city's capital planner for the general obligation bond program. It's a program that we vote on every 2 years. We plan in the even years and vote in the odd years for our bonding capacity. And the general obligation bond, the primary reason for that bond program is to keep our existing facilities in the best shape possible, rather than going out and building new. Because once we take the general obligation bond program and then go build, for example, a new fire station, then we have to, man that fire station. We have to buy the equipment for the fire station. We have to maintain and operate that fire station, what we call CIP coming online, that affects the operating budget of the city. So with the GRT bond, we can take that revenue that we know is coming in with the GRT and bond against it, and then pay the debt service off over a longer period of time. Our current GO bond payback is about, we've bumped it up a little bit to 13 years, but we pay them back in about 10 years. And so that allows us to not raise taxes while we're continuing to keep our assets in the best possible shape.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, I want to ask you kind of one more question about this article I read in New Mexico in Depth, and where, to paraphrase, it said you had mixed feelings about the new stadium. People of all walks of life attend the games, and that's special, but there might be a better way to spend our money. If it were to be an economic driver, I can see how investing in a stadium is a worthwhile strategy. It sounds to me like a lot of folks, you kind of have ambivalent about the pros versus the cons of a new stadium, especially since it's could be in your neighborhood. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, actually, it'll be practically literally in my backyard. And the prospect of having a giant edifice in my backyard is not the best. If it were up to me, I would say I don't really want it. But I, as a representative of, other folks in the neighborhood and as a representative of people in general, I have to try to keep my mind open. So I've been trying to weigh the pros and cons. I mean, one of the things that occurs to me is that this might be an opportunity to have some improvements in our neighborhood that have been long neglected. Francis Armijo, the president of the South Broadway Association, has talked about how a lot of their needs have been neglected. Even just things like getting rid of weeds and garbage in their neighborhood. So if this were the kind of thing that could kind of improve along those kinds of levels, additional infrastructure. I mean, we have trouble with drainage here. When it rains, we have large puddles that persist for a long time. Improvements to the bridges that access downtown, but I don't see that as part of the funding. So I'm wondering how that's going to come about in advance of opening, a stadium. So thinking about utilities. A friend of mine was talking today about we might lack capacity in the power grid. So we might have to have another substation put in. Things like roads, like how are we going to pay for those infrastructural requirements in order to fit capacity for a stadium? If that were paid for, that would be great. It would be beneficial to everybody in the area, but that's not part of the bond proposal as far as I know. And one concern that comes up is that there may be increased costs as the availability of materials and labor and all of the things that is sort of inhibiting the housing market, coming inflation, those kinds of unexpected costs in the budget as it's laid out right now. So those are some concerns. On the other hand, United has been a very friendly and very generous community member. I think that they've done a lot of things that are pretty appealing. I think that if we could have an anchor in this area with the rail yards that generates interest in the rail yards and also is sort of a friendly and caring entity, that might be beneficial over some other kind of like retail enterprise in which the corporate bottom line is their priority. I don't see that as the case with United, which is nice. Another thing is, thinking about the quality of life in Albuquerque and trying to think about how do we make Albuquerque a magnet for development, trying to think about getting good jobs here. The stadium itself would probably have limited capacity for generating good jobs, but thinking about other people to whom it might be attractive and who might bring good paying jobs. So trying to think about it as a systemic issue and as a larger issue with a strategy in mind for Albuquerque going into the future.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Danny, I'm starting to see some activity in the chat. Do you have any questions you want to?
Yeah, let me read a question here from Marietta, because this question is kind of going through the chat quite a bit, different iterations of it. The question is, and this is probably to Mark, with the proposed sites, what's the plan for traffic management and parking? So with the proposed sites, what's the plan for traffic management and parking?
Sure, Danny, thanks for the question. So as we mentioned, the downtown location was being looked at because of both the rail runner and the availability. We know Albuquerque has a lot of surface lots, parking lots that really aren't used at night or on the weekends. So that's something else that we have available, both city and privately owned lots that the consultant had looked at. as far as bringing people downtown and being, less than a 20-minute walk to the stadium. So, you come downtown, grab a bite to eat, go to the game, match, and then you can, go back downtown and either take the rail runner back to one of the stations or walk back to your vehicle and leave downtown. So that's why we're looking at the downtown areas and not in the areas of UNM or the far west side, where it would be 100% dependent on vehicle traffic. So, downtown has a thriving bus system. We have, bicycle lanes and shared the bike boulevard on Silver. I mean, we have a lot of multimodal availability at downtown. So that's why we're really looking at downtown.
Thank you.
Danny, there's one from Ian Colburn. He wants to know, is it true that the 15 million could be spent on affordable housing instead?
So a little bit of background for everybody on the YouTube and the meeting. This is not a new GRT bond. This is existing capacity that the city has paid off and can refinance to allow us to spend this funding. So it with the will of the council and the administration, it could be used for a lot of different things. But that's why we went to council to ask them for this $50 million to be put on the ballot, so that we could get the temperature of the city of Albuquerque to see, everyone talks about needing a new stadium. It'd be a great thing. It's a community investment. That's why the city would own it, not the United. That's why we would have this facility lease agreement that they would be on the hook for the term of the bond, where if, say something bad happens and they don't, bring in another 12,000 people per game, which I don't see happening because it's such a popular sport here in New Mexico. But if something happened, we would have clawbacks and definitely clauses that we would be able to recoup our funding from the United. But the city would still own it and then be able to use it for a future use. So, right now, up to 8% of the general obligation bond program can be assigned to affordable housing. And that we've seen that it's a very successful program. Several cycles ago, back in the early aughts and early teens, it was $25 million per cycle. And I think that really kickstarted the affordable housing building that we've seen in the last decade or so. So, we know, look, there's a lot of needs, right? And the pie is only so big, but it can't necessarily all go towards one thing or another, because then you lose that ability to kind of have all the different aspects of city life in Albuquerque. And that includes public safety, but it also includes, multimodal roads, storm systems, so we need to make sure that we spread what we have across all the various, things that we live, work, play, right? We want to be a live, work, play city. So.
Hey, Mark, I noticed a question in the chat room, and it was something I mentioned in the presentation. Maybe you can go into a little more detail on this. It pertains to the $100,000 annual payment that the United will make to the city. And kind of a two-part question. Now, how is that number derived? And how does that stack up to what the isotopes are doing? Are there some parallels in that portion of the agreement?
So Paul, I would, I don't have the isotopes agreement in front of me, so I don't want to, misspeak about that. The 100,000 is just the concessions part of it. So it would be a minimum of 100,000. It would be in addition to the 800,000 per year for rent for the facility for the
Right.
United to pay us. Right now, I believe isotopes pay 700,000 a year. The last time I checked.
I think
But,
it's actually 750. But,
okay,
yeah.
so 750, so it'd be a little bit more. And you know, I think that's pretty on par. You know, the team has promised a $10 million capital investment, as you mentioned in the beginning in your presentation. And you know, I think they're showing that they want to be good stewards and community partners with this multi-purpose facility.
Okay, thank you. Danny, do you have any more in the chat? Or in the
Yeah.
Q&A?
So we have a question about first, will additional bonds be required for street widening to and from the stadium, an additional electrical substation, and other incidentals?
So the feasibility study that CAA Icon did was very preliminary, very, you know, 50,000 feet view of what we would need. But they also included knowing that when we got, if the bond passes and we got the voters' approval, that these issues would have to be addressed in the various preferred sites, the 2 preferred sites, and then the 4 sites overall. And they took that into account into their best guess estimates of the construction, and that also includes design costs. So those construction numbers do also include design. So we'll be able to address those things as we get there.
Okay, Danny, I'm gonna read a question that was posted a few minutes ago. And it also pertains to the bonds. And it says, basically the gross receipts tax paid by the stadium attendees will be used to pay back the debt. So what happens if over the next 25 years, there are not enough gross receipts tax to make the payment to the city? So if attendance drops or the revenue stream diminishes, what is the impact or the risk of that scenario?
And Paul, I think that was addressed in the letter of intent that we would include clawbacks in the final operation and lease agreement with the team.
Okay. Okay.
And Mark, sorry, just real quickly, could you mention again who did the feasibility study?
Sure. CAA Icon, and their study is on the city's website.
Hey, Mark, if the bond passes and people are going to be, you know, voting on that without knowledge of where the location is going to be, and the bond passes, who's the decision-making body of determining the location? How does that get ironed out and decided?
Right. So we have in the feasibility study, we have some preferred sites. That's why we brought on, with council's approval, Julian Gross for the community benefits agreement to potentially work with these neighborhoods, whether it's South Broadway or Borellis. And so we would want to be able to go to council and go out to the community and get some input, and then have a finalized site pretty quickly. Because as the COO, Lawrence Rial, said, that we would want to get into construction here before the end of 2022.
Okay, thank you. Danny, any more in the chat you want to throw out?
Yeah, let me read this one here. So it says a community land trust was created by the City of London prior to its Olympics to regulate property values and to make those displaced by the Olympic Stadium whole. Would something like that be considered?
I don't want to pass the buck on that one, but that seems to be above my pay grade. That's a great idea. And that's something that we will definitely talk to Mr. Gross about in the community benefits analysis agreement. Sorry.
Didn't Sawmill just recently, well, not so recently, but didn't Sawmill do a community land trust that ends up benefiting their community for all the development that's happening in their barrio?
So Sawmill does have a land trust, yes, but as the CIP official, we're getting outside of my boundaries within the city, box of where my expertise lies. So I really don't want to, misspeak and give any kind of misleading or incorrect information.
Just trying to follow the Q&A here, Danny, in the chat.
Yeah, some of the questions are a little long, so I'm trying to read them. I'm not an expert, but been trying to study up on these issues because
Sure.
There's one on the questioning whether if there is, am I understanding correctly, it's basically the gross receipts tax paid by stadium attendees that will be used to pay back the debt. So what happens if over the next 25 years there are not enough gross receipts tax to make the repayment to the city?
Right, Flora, and we just answered that one a little bit ago. I'm very confident to say that we would definitely have clawbacks in the lease agreement with United in case that happened.
One of the questions is why wasn't a percentage of revenue offered rather than a base 100,000?
In the letter of intent, thanks Danny for that question, and Maricela. In the letter of intent, it's not the final agreement, right? It's just a letter that Mr. Trevisani and Mr. Rael signed as a jumping off point. These would be, things that both the United had asked for and that the city is demanding from the team. So things are still on the table, and this isn't the final agreement by far. So there could be some changes, obviously.
So somebody's asking about giving an example of a clawback. I don't really know how that works. Does anybody know the answer to that?
Sure, whether we would have the team have something in escrow, whether we would terminate the lease earlier and take back all of the assets that the city would then be able to lease to another team or another facility, not another facility, but another soccer team, or any other kind of use that we could have with that facility. That's why the city is intent on owning the facility. So those kind of clawbacks would be written into the lease agreements.
Okay. Danny, anything else in the chat room that we can pose to Lisa or Mark?
I think we've
There's a new one in the Q&A, Danny, about, yeah, projects always go over budget, and the projection is that it may be about $2 million short. So what is the plan for making up that difference?
So I'm going to admit some faux outrage there. As the capital implementation project manager, I try to get budgets, projects in under budget and on time. So, but look, we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. No one knew about COVID. No one knew about the crash. No one knew about this inflation that's happening now with the rebound. We have jumping off points, right? So the session starts in January. If we're short, we might still ask the state for additional funding if that's something that the community wants. There are opportunities where we can still. This isn't necessarily all of the funding that we'll have, because we wouldn't start construction on a project that we're short funding on. So definitely with the severance tax coming in higher than expected, there is opportunities to partner with the state. They've already been great with the $8 million that they've provided over the last 2 legislative sessions. And I think that would be an opportunity for future funding.
Danny, we got about 6 or 7 minutes left. I want to give Lisa and Mark, before we wrap up, an opportunity maybe to just do kind of a summary or a wrap up of their thoughts and position on this topic. We really appreciate both of your input today. It's been really educational for me, learning about this. But Lisa, would you like to do a little wrap up of your perspective on this?
Sure. Yeah. The thing that I always want to bring into the conversation is the fact that our part of town has been subject to a lot of traumas, that urban renewal and those kinds of projects have been projected to benefit our part of town, and unfortunately ends up being a very fraught relationship that we have with people who are trying to improve our part of town. A lot of trauma. It started with the introduction of the rail yards, railroads that bifurcated our community. But we also need to be thinking about the future and what would we like Albuquerque to be as my kids grow up, and I want them to stay here. I want them to have good paying jobs, and I want there to be opportunities for them. I think one thing we should be thinking about is growing the system to accommodate more development. And I'd really like to see it happen in the center of town instead of on the periphery, because I think that sprawl can really take a toll on a city. And I think having affordable housing in the center of town, having benefits to community is a potential outcome of this project. I have yet to see that spelled out. So I'm concerned about that. But I do think that it has potential to be beneficial to not just the neighborhood in which it's placed, but also to the whole city. I'm still waiting to see what happens. So I'm trying to be a fair arbiter.
Sure. Thank you so much. Mark,
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Paul. I really, again, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and speak before the group today. And Lisa, I think you have a lot of great points and everything. I just want to remind people that the restructuring of the bonds of the GRT does not raise taxes. It's not a new bond. It's restructuring existing capacity that we have. The goal isn't for a revenue generating project. It's an investment in the community. It's an investment in Albuquerque, and it's an investment in downtown Albuquerque. We want people to be able to come downtown and enjoy with their family a very relatively inexpensive night of great entertainment with this great partner that the United has been already with the Isotopes. And you see, granted, one year and then one COVID year is not necessarily a trend, but they had the highest attendance in USL in their first year, and even with COVID, they're about 9,000 per event. So we know that it's a popular sport, and we know that people will come in and watch it. And with the challenges that the United has, that they need their own soccer-specific facility, I think the city has stepped up and asked the citizens to tell us both administration and council, whether this is something that you really want. So that's why we put it to the voters on November 2nd. And again, it's not a corporate giveaway. The United will not own the stadium. The city will own the
Right.
stadium. So I just appreciate the time, and thanks for everyone for taking time and listening to me.
Thank you. Appreciate all your input. And before we go, I want to mention a couple of things. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, on the CABQ website, there's two documents that people can access. One is a executive summary of this proposal, and the second one is a much more detailed, several hundred pages, if I recall, detailed plans and more information. So that information.
A nice 94-page executive summary. So
Exactly.
It's a quick read.
Yeah.
It's a quick read.
It is. It's a quick read. But no, it goes into great detail. I mean, CAA did a really great job. They came in, they talked to the team, they talked to the city, and one more point I just wanted to make is that we want to listen to the neighborhoods and stuff, and that's why we did hire Julian Gross and have that lawyer for the community benefits agreement also.
Okay. Danny, do you want to share with everyone where this meeting has been recorded, where it can be viewed and accessed by folks that want to see it?
Yeah. So if you guys want to watch this again, or if you want to share it with your friends, please do. We are revamping our YouTube channel. And so I I will put a link to our YouTube channel in the chat, as well as if you follow us on Facebook, the link to this recording will also be on our Facebook. And I will, you know what, I'll link our Facebook in the chat as well. Thank you so much to everyone that came out on a Sunday. Thank you so much for your questions. And of course, a super massive thank you to Lisa and Mark for being here, for taking the time, and for educating us, because I think I know a lot more now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Lisa, for your input. We really appreciate you participating in our forum today.
Yes. May I say a word, Paul?
Of course.
Thank you very much to, as we've said, Mark and Lisa. This has been very informative to me. And Danny, thank you so much for all of your work on this and your tech work on this. You can also go to bernalillodems.org and we'll have it posted there pretty soon. Special thanks to Paul, because he is the one that had, he was it was his brainchild to do this. And a lot of people are wanting to know more about this. And so I am so glad that we have voters that want to be informed. And thank you all for taking time today to come out and learn about this. We are so fortunate to live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in this beautiful land of enchantment amongst so many great people that care about issues that impact our community. So thank you for being those people. And once again, have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy Balloon Fiesta time, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.